Okay, and let me first thank the conference organizer inviting me here to share my view about urban, let me see, how could I get this, about urban governance and finance. But the computer does not seem to be very friendly to me. Let me get this fixed. Yeah. The mouse does not work.
Okay, so you want this, yes?
Yeah, I want to get to the page.
Yes.
Yeah, it should be here.
Here.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, all right.
And then
yeah,
like this.
Okay, good.
Oh, you have this if you want to.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay, in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to take you through the roller coaster and what's going on in China. And today, urbanization rate in China is 54%. Okay? And Professor Li Santong just presented a new urbanization plan, which projects the urbanization rate in year 2020 as 60%. And there is also a study that projects the urbanization rate by year 2050 up to the level of 75%, which means in China, there will be 1.13 billion people living in the city in the year of 2050. So the central question of my presentation is that what will be the most likely scenario of urban governance and finance in year 2050? And because by that time, cities will be the main domain for economic growth. Most people live in city. And urban governance and finance will be very crucial if we want to expect that city are managed very well. And this is also a central question assigned to me by the conference organizer. Now, and how to think about what would be the likely scenario in year 2050. Of course, before I came here, I did not have the benefit of listening to Wendy's nice presentation on projecting the future. But I gave some thought, and I think we could give 3 considerations. And the first is historical, because urban development is path-dependent. And so we will need to understand what happened now in China before we think about what China would change. And the second is that we should also give some thought on the likely effort of the society, and that would steal the urbanization course. Now, this is exactly what Professor Li Santong said about the new urbanization plan. Whether it's realistic or not, that's another issue, but that represents the effort of the society trying to manage the urbanization process so to achieve a certain vision of urban China in year 2030. That's in that plan. And the third consideration is the foreseeable constraining factors, because we always have some expectation for what happened. But then along the way, there are always some constraining factors. But constraining factors are not a very bad thing when we talk about the future. And I think that if we look at mathematics, I mean, solving an optimization problem without any constraint, you get endless solution. But if you have a more constraint, you can figure out where is the solution. So that's why it's not a difficulty if we have some constraining factor to consider. Okay, now I will start very quickly to talk a bit about the recent history. And everyone knows that China changed a lot in the urban scape. And this picture just shows how much China had changed within a short period of time. In Shanghai, 1990, Pudong looked like an undeveloped area. I mean, that's the area across the river on the far end. Now today, Pudong is a modern city. Shenzhen, in year 1980, I visited Shenzhen in 1982. It's exactly like this. It's just a rural area. Now today, Shenzhen is a metropolitan area. Many people have heard the presentation about Shenzhen in this conference a few times. Okay, but we also confront a lot of a problem in China today. Just put in a few things. Housing price is very, very high now, and the indicator to show the housing price affordability is a price-income ratio. In China, the price-income ratio for most first-tier cities has reached over 15, and Beijing has reached over 20. What this means? You work for 20 years without spending a penny of the money in order to buy a house, an apartment for your family. That's what it means. So housing price is so high, it's getting very, very unaffordable. I know Hong Kong is also confronting the similar problem recently. And the second thing is that that's very, very odd. I mean, in all around the world, this only happened in China, is the urban housing vacancies, and 65 million vacancies. Another survey showed 28% vacancy rate in urban China, and that's from a survey data from a university. Now, we also have the local debt, growing local debt, and Professor Li also mentioned that. And we have social tensions arising from the rural to urban land conversion. And we know from Professor Li's presentation that China's land urbanization is much faster than population and urbanization. So that means the government convert the rural land into urban land in a significant amount, but this process causes a lot of social tension. And also we see a lot of inefficiency in land use, over-conversion of rural land, and also the inefficient use of urban land. Ghost town, that basically culminates, what happened in China. The question is why all these things happen? Today, China is supposed to be a market economy, and the market will not function like this, but we have all these things. So I will try to tell the story quickly. And I think we will need to revisit the national economic growth strategy, the governance structure, the tax sharing system, and urban GDP growth strategy, and the land concession, land supply, and housing market. We have to put all these things together. But fundamentally, China is a growth machine. It's a state capitalism, a growth machine, which started from the economic reform in the late 70s. China tried to seize the opportunity from globalization in order to drive investment and employment. So we learn a lot from Singapore, from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, open door policy, and then what we have is cheap land, cheap labor, and then the government can also supply credit in a very cheap way so that the local government can improve infrastructure in order to attract foreign direct investment. And foreign direct investment in the 70s and the 80s means manufacturing, which require land. So you can see the special economic zones, industry parks, and all these things come up in the Chinese urban areas. And that's the economic background of China's urban development. Now let's look at the governance structure. In China, we can look at two systems. One is the official appointment system, the political structure, and the other is the economic structure. Both are different. Okay? If you look at the economic structure, you think China is a highly decentralized country. But if you look at the political structure, it's a highly centralized country because the central government appoints the top leader of the province. And the province, the government, provincial government, appoint the top leader of the prefecture. So this is the way the political structure work. Local government, on the economic side, local government does not have the taxing power. That's one thing we need to keep in mind, and that affects the behavior of a local government. Now, the mechanism is that when the central government decides the national GDP growth target, and is achieved by all levels of government, because they all trace the same target, and that's their performance indicator, and that determines their chance of promotion. So that's how the whole country reacts to the central government mandate and the directive. And this is a kind of structure that determines the incentive and which determines the behavior. So what we see is that competition among local leaders of the same level for the best GDP growth performance in exchange for the better chance for political promotion. Professor Wu mentioned the quote of Zhao Yanqing, who turned out to be my friend as well. So the planner's job is to advise your client to build up the other city. And I think that's really the reality in China. Now, this diagram shows how this works. Central government say, let's achieve 12% GDP growth, and then provincial government say, okay, we all have to do this, and then it goes to the lowest level, it says we have to do this. But is this realistic in every locality? That's not a kind of issue that could be debated at the government bureaucracy. Right? That's the governance structure. Now, the tax sharing system. And today, if we look at the tax structure, the tax revenue, the country have like 11 trillion tax revenue a year. And central government take 48%, local government take 52%. But central government take 48% and transfer 70% of the 48% back to the local government through the intergovernmental transfer. Okay? But at the local government level, at the expenditure side, the local government spending is 80%, 85%. Central government spending is 15%. So today you hear the local government complain that we are given more job than the money that we could do the job. Is this the fact? No, because the central government has the intergovernmental transfer. The reason is that central government wants the local government to achieve the GDP growth. And local government have to find the resource and to boost the GDP. So what do? No tax power, not allowed to borrow. So they have to find some way to do it. So that's a land concession, because the land in city is state-owned. The city government consider land is a resource that they can mobilize and capitalize. Okay, so that's one channel. And the second channel is also related to land. If you create a company that's called the Urban Development Investment Corporation, you give that corporation some land, the corporation can use the land as the asset for collateral to borrow from commercial bank. So basically amplify the effect of land mobilization and capitalization. Then why you need the land? You use the land for development of a real estate. Most of the real estate tax is local tax. So it's good for the local. Okay? So basically, municipal government find mobilizing the land capital is the best way to meet the GDP target, because the public investment is going to the book of GDP. Real estate investment is also going to the book of GDP. And from real estate investment, you collect the local tax. You can do the game second around. The second time. You can do it just again. So that's what happened. Now let's look at the numbers. The land sale revenue to the city as a percentage of a local revenue. Let's just look at the last column. It's like 50%, even 67% until it dropped in recent years. But it's still a very, very big amount of local revenue. That's how local government come up with the resource for capital investment to boost the GDP growth. Now let's look at the game here. This diagram is showing the decision-making logic of the local government. You need to develop economic, the local economy, so you need the industry. Okay? Industry, you got to have land. So when the city develop land, part of the land is for industry supply. And you use the very cheap industry supply to rule the FDI, the investment, the employment, to the firms to come to the city. If these firms come here and produce, local government gets some local tax. So it's a good business to do. Now you get the employment, you get the population, you get the service, you get the real estate. So you have the second part of the land for commercial and residential land development. where you have the real estate sector, you also collect the local tax revenue. And then the government also created this local financing platform and to borrow from commercial bank, so the government also get the capital to service the land. So this is how, this is the incentive for the government to boost the local development. Okay? A lot of the things are related to the land operation here. Now look at the reality. The red dot shows the industry land price. It's just about 1,000 yuan per square meter. Here I show 68 cities. And the green dot is the land price for residential and commercial use. And look at the highest 4 dots, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen. Okay? The smaller city at the lower end, the green dot is the price is lower. But the striking fact is that all cities use a very cheap price, no price, even negative price for industry land in order to attract investment, in order to attract employment. On the way, this also become an incentive to induce inefficiency in industry land use. But on the other hand, I mean, land supply is limited in China. When you have to squeeze part of the land for industry, and then you get very little for commercial and residential development. But the mechanism is through the auction. Okay? And the local government is a monopoly supplier of land. So you don't worry about the limited supply of land. Once you put the land into the market for bidding, you bid a very high price. You basically take the monopoly polyistic profit. And so that's what happened. Look at the land supply scheme in Beijing. And we can see the structure for the last 3 years. Industry land supply, infrastructure occupy a major percentage. Even though Beijing's economy has already moved to the knowledge economy. I mean, if we compare Beijing with New York, with Paris and London, and the other cities, industry land in the other cities are below 5%. But in Beijing, the land supply at the margin, industry land supply is still take 16%. So this is a huge distortion. Now, what is remaining for commercial housing is just very little. Okay? So you have a very limited land supply, very high land price, and we have other factors affecting the land supply. In China, the famous policy is the farmland preservation. 1.8 billion of basic farmland has to be maintained every year. So for local government, I mean, land supply is really a major constraint. But when you have this constraint, you still need to supply enough land for industry development. And what's remaining for residential and commercial is just too limited. Today, the fact is that we all know in China, land supply for residential and commercial purposes is not sufficient. But that's the result of how this whole thing work. For the city government, they are happy to supply limited land for residential and commercial because they continue to receive the monopolistic profit. Now, this is the fundamental cause for the driver of the high residential housing price. Look at the housing price. It grows so quickly, and my data just stopped at the year 2011. In fact, for the last 3 years, it continued to be skyrocketing. And I have one on the nominal price and the red one for the real price. And I have a regression to show how the residential land price affect the housing price. And this is a cross-section data for cities. It shows that when the city's land price is high, the housing price is also very high, and the fit is very good. So we can see the correlation there. But the question is that when the housing price reaches that high, when the price-income ratio is so unaffordable, why demand continue to be so strong in China? Okay? Look at the real estate investment for the last 10 years. Every year the growth rate is the double digit, 20%, 25%, or even 30%. Why? Okay? This would not happen in any other countries. Let's look at what's the reason. When prices are going up, of course, I mean, real estate developer want to supply more. But on the demand side, why people continue to invest? Okay? Of course, people want to invest in housing. They think it is a good investment. That's part of it. Now, China is urbanizing. That's where the demand comes from. But Chinese saving has no place to go. You don't want to put it in the commercial bank because the central government controls the interest rate. So the interest rate is lower than the inflation rate. If you put your money in the commercial bank, in the checking account, it's not a good idea. And the Chinese stock market is very, very untransparent and very poorly regulated. Even over the last 6 years, our economy continued to grow and the stock market continued to drop. So nobody really want to play the game in the stock market. You get the Chinese yuan, you can't simply spend Chinese yuan in EU because it's not an internationalized currency. So what you can do, you put it into a real estate. And we don't have education and the welfare program very well. We don't have a Medicare the program very well. And people worry about their pension, their old age. So they think that the best thing is to invest in housing. So that's where the demand comes from. And we also have studies to show the so-called mother-in-law effect. Because there are more boys in China than girls. So in order to raise the competitiveness of the boys, to get the bride, so the parents just purchase the house much ahead of time for the boys. And that's the empirical study was published in the Journal of Political Economy. So the whole situation is quite complicated, but all directions point to the huge demand for the housing in market. Now, we now know all this problem. And what we are going to do, I consider this as a pivotal time. The central government last year announced the policy reform direction. And there are several major schemes that's related to urban development. Remove the hukou system and also unify the rural and urban land market. Professor Lee mentioned some of these. And then reform the taxation system by introducing the property tax into the cities and accelerate the interest rate liberalization, and also shift the role of the government and, to be service-oriented and delink the local government performance from the GDP growth. All these are written in the central government document, and I believe this is a very good document. But the question is that whether this would get implemented. I think I'm not very optimistic whether the reform, the good reform, will get implemented in the next 6 or 7 years. That's the timetable. Why? Because today we need to reform for sure, but it's not a very good time for China to reform because the global economy is not favorable to China. And the Chinese government really worry about the drawback of the reform in the initial years before the reform really pay off. But in any case, let's look a bit further what China really want to achieve in terms of urbanization. Now the vision, I actually borrowed this from Professor Lee's the Development Research Center and the World Bank report, which I also participated before I joined the Lincoln Center. And I think the vision is clear: efficient, inclusive, sustainable urbanization. Is it possible? I think it's possible if the new reform get implemented and achieve the intended outcome, let's say by year 2020. But we face tremendous constraints. And our labor cost is no longer cheap. Right? Productivity capacity is still in surplus because of the year 2008 financial crisis. Our population is aging. And then geographically, China is going to face a major constraint in the water shortage. And we have a scarcity of land and natural resource, and also we face climate change. And all this means the cost of doing business is going to be higher and higher in China. That's why the reform is going to be in the uphill battle. And then we also ask, economic reform without political reform, is it possible? Today, we don't have a timetable for political reform yet, so that's a big question mark. Put this aside, let's look at what will be the scenario of urban governance and finance. Let's assume this reform is going to be successful. Now, in the next 7 or 8 years, if China can achieve some key result through the reform, we will see the role of market become much stronger in the allocation of a resource, including land resource. There will be no hukou constraint, and the rural land market and the urban land market will be unified, so we don't have this social tension between the farmer and the city government. And the farmers also get the real fair compensation to the land taking for urban development. Our interest rate may be liberalized, RMB internationalized, and stock and bond market will be better regulated and transparent, and the price of urban services will be more close to the social and environmental cost of the service supply. So that's the rosy picture for the next 7 years. If that happens, let's look at what the local government would look like in terms of governance and finance. The role of a city government, I think, is to manage and finance the growing expenditure need for public infrastructure and public service, not merely try to drive economic growth. The main source of municipal revenue in China will be broad-based income tax, consumption tax, and property tax. Okay? So the local government financial revenue structure will change. Land-based financing, I still think that this is a good practice. Don't overdo it. So it will be a viable land value capture tool for financing of some public infrastructure. This will remain, but we will really keep a close eye on the practice of land-based financing. Now, city government will be allowed to borrow, to raise funds from the capital market. It's already happening in China. So I'm optimistic about this. Because of the local borrowing, and the city government will learn how to manage their financial book very well, and they will need to build the financial link between planning and practice, planning and budget. So I think the Chinese government will have a very good chance to be a good financial manager in the future. And we need a check and balance, and this is actually not very specifically talked in the central government document, but we could anticipate that the local leaders would be locally elected and mainly respond to the need of the city residents. Because in the future, city leaders will spend the tax revenue from property tax. That's from the city resident. And the city resident, in order to tolerate the tax that everyone up to hate, they want to be part of the decision process. So property taxation is one chance for China to change the local government governance structure. Okay? And we also need to have some better representation in the People's Congress as a check and balance to the local government. And then we may see Chinese city growing bigger and bigger. There might be some sort of metropolitan-wide regional government coming up. On the grassroots level, we may see some sort of the volunteer and grassroots governance the arrangement coming out. So that's what we would anticipate for the next 3 decades if the current reform can really get through. But then we look at this governance and finance structure. I'm sure you think that this just resembles the local government in democracy. China is not a democracy. We know there is no timetable for political reform yet. And is this possible? We need to have a little bit reality check. My personal view is that democracy in China is going to be inevitable. The question is really about the time. Why? Now Chinese allow individual property right. We all own apartment. In the city, we know what would be the impact of a city decision on the value of our property. Okay? So we will want to be part of the decision-making process. Okay? This is a kind of fundamental force for democracy to happen in China. If I can make a speculation, if democracy happens in China, it will happen at the city level, because all this trend will eventually come together to push the democracy in China. It may not be the kind of a full-blown democracy as what we see in Portugal and France or so, but at least I think the leaders need to be accountable to the people, and the people will monitor, will determine the leadership at the local. So that would be the beginning of the democracy in China. So my presentation is up here, and I expect to have some interaction with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Zhiu. Thank you very much. You have been given perhaps the hottest topic to deal with, so I'm impressed how you've dealt with it. I'm sorry I was not able to attract your attention, flagging my 5 minutes, so I must allow for 1, maximum 2 really brief questions, please. But thank you very much for the comprehensive coverage. So I saw that question and that question. So first and second, please be brief. Thank you.
Very brief is why Chinese communist regime considered growth is the most important thing for them to do. Thank you.
Well, I try to avoid talking about this, but I think everyone knows, I mean, in a single-party ruling society, what is the biggest risk is unemployment, okay? So the central government is very much concerned about the GDP growth, and because the growth rate determines the employment. If you look at the Premier Li Keqiang's speech to the Chinese working union before he became the premier, he said he consulted the Chinese Academy of Social Science. And if China raised 1 percentage point of growth rate, okay, GDP growth rate, how many new employment that would be generated? The Chinese Academy of Social Science tell him is 1.2 million to 1.4 million new jobs. Okay. Then I think he got the point. He's a premier. This is exactly what he wants. So he's thinking about should China go for 7.5% or 6%? It has a strong implication.
How would you suggest that the system of public ownership of land in China should be reformed?
Well, that's exactly what the Lincoln Center is doing in China. In short, I think today, I mean, many scholars say the system is not working, has a lot of holes, and let's just throw away, privatize the land. Is it possible? I think it's very, very difficult, very political risk. Think about it. You have a big family, a grandfather, and many kids, and now they all live together, and they decide tomorrow we are all separate. And that would be what happened. It will be a big fight among the brothers. Go to the Chinese village. Think about the privatization of the land. And in village, you get the land. Some are at the upstream of the water. Some are in the downstream of water. Who get what? It's going to be bloodshed. I live in rural area before. I know these things. Yeah? Historically, this is determined gradually. But today, suddenly you want to split it. The political risk is very high. So my sense is that we just keep what we have in terms of state ownership for land. International experience show public land leasing can work, can be efficient, can be equitable. We can learn this from UK, Hong Kong, and Israel, so many other countries. Okay? Collective land ownership in Chinese rural areas is a difficulty. Okay? It's something that's very difficult to throw away, but I feel that we should keep it. we can keep it for the next 30 years when 75% of the population are in the city. And that's much easier to privatize the land in the rural area.
Thank you very much. That was
Many thanks. Thank you very much, Olivia. Thank you very much, Andrea, and all the colleagues. I have two news, one good and one bad. Let me start by the bad one. I am the 20th speaker on a Saturday night at 5:30, almost 5:30. I should have already finished my presentation. The good news is that I will try to do my speech in less than 15 minutes. Then, as we used to say in the airport, fasten seatbelt. And I will try also to give you some indication on what I consider, it's obviously a personal view, what are the mega trends, what are, in the second point, the EU urban issue, and the third, in French we say, l'argent est le nerf de la guerre, some potential activities in the EU research and innovation on urban issue. I will base my presentation, I've inspired my presentation from several publications of the Commission. I think that some of them are known to you. If not, I will just quote this one. This one, Sustainable Urban Dynamics, which is a very nice booklet which makes the state of the art of all the urban research activity that we have had in the 7th Framework Program. I think that it's a very good wedding agency and it makes a very good state of the art of what we have done in social sciences, in energy, in environment, in transport, in security. Then it's for maybe the publication that I will recommend you more. Some mega trends. I've tried in this kind of tree to speak about values. This morning we had a very interesting session on spirituality, on values. What are the values of the people? And are we going in the future towards a more egoist society or more altruist society? I never heard during these 2 days the term egoism and altruism. And I think that this is, for the future of a city, the future of a society, a key element. What we put first, the personal or the social, the private or the common? Are we going towards more LTD kind of world, with everything is LTD, limited, or Société Anonyme, or non-profit volontariat? Is the corporate social responsibility and the social entrepreneur becoming the norms or not? I think that's the kind of things that we do not speak enough, but are relevant in terms of global trends. Another trend, which is very important, is what will be in the future the relation between man and technology. You're probably like Michelangelo. That's my preferred picture between both. But I think that that could be the future. And in many, many places of Europe and the world, we have discussion on what will be the future role of technology. Life expectancy also is a key subject. We have obviously the increase of population. Recently, the United Nations spoke not about a plateau of population after 2050, but they consider that we will continue to increase to be, by the end of the century, 11 billion people. In a certain sense, that's the most beautiful thing in the life. More people are alive, it's human life, it's beautiful. In the same time, it's very strong constraints on resources, on land use, and so on. But life expectancy is also an important subject. At the world level, at the end of the 50s, the life expectancy was 50 years, and today it's almost 70 years. I think that if we consider that, it's a key element for the future of our society. A multipolar world. In the 90s, the United States and Europe together represented almost 70% of the world GDP. By 2050, together, Europe and US will only represent around 30%. This is really the confirmation of a multipolar world. Let me go to some urban issue. I will not go into detail, but we have at the European Union level always the notion of subsidiarity. And if you are Eurosceptic, you say that nothing should be done at the European Union level. If you are a Euro fanatic, like I am biased, I should say most of the things should be done at the European Union level. But this concept of subsidiarity, where the action should take place, at EU level or at local level, is very, very crucial and very typical from Europe. We have, during the 20 years, I'm sure that some of these terms will ring a bell in your mind. Urban, the initiative, the community initiative, the city of tomorrow, concerto, civitas. It's all different terms that rings a bell. Then we have always many different activities, but it's very difficult to see at the European Union level who is the owner. Who is the owner? What department in the Commission, for example, what DG should take care of urban issue? It could be DG Regional Policy and Urban Policy. It could be DG Environment for sustainable city. It could be DG Energy for the smart cities. It could be ICT DG Connect. Then we have a big debate on who is the owner of this issue and who has to promote the research, the innovation, and obviously the implementation of towards better cities. I will not go into detail on this. I will just point out some of what I consider European Union challenge versus the world challenges. In Europe, when you speak about a city of 34 million inhabitants, you think to a big country. That's when you have Malta, Luxembourg, Cyprus in our country, and you see that they are a country with one commissioner, with one representative of the European Council. You can say, is this a good idea? But our challenge, I think, aging and shrinking city, it has been reminded several times during these 2 days. One point is the cultural heritage, the built environment and the cultural heritage has not been quoted often these 2 days, and I think that this is a crucial challenge for Europe. You know, if you want to put PV panel on the roof of Florence, it's not the same thing that if you have to put them on Shenzhen. It does not require the same kind of authorization for the city. And then two other I think that they are very European concepts. NIMBY, everybody knows that. I think that our American, Australian, Canadian colleagues have that, not in my backyard. But banana, I think, becomes a key problem even in Europe. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And I think that this acronym, in the same time, I understand the logic, but I see also the limit for the progress. I remember the limits to growth that we have spoken. But when you have this NIMBY and banana, before to present a project, you have NIMBY and banana on the table of negotiation, it does not make things easier. Another problem, I will not call it problem, another issue that we have never quoted, not enough, I think, is the question of migration in Europe. I'm not especially a fan of United Colors of Benetton, but I think that this represents well Europe. If you are in London, in Paris, in Brussels, in Madrid, and you take the subway, that's what you have. It's a very, very diverse society, probably more diverse than in many other places of the world. And that's a challenge, how we will manage this diversity. And now let me speak about very boring things, but maybe the most interesting thing for you because it's the future of money. And that's, I'm sure that many of you will take note, but I will not go into details, so the presentation will be available. I will just point out that in many different parts of the Horizon 2020, the new framework program, let me mention, for example, just the energy efficiency. Apologize for this hopeful jargon acronym, EE7 2014-2015, capacity of public authorities to plan and implement sustainable energy policy and measure. This is a kind of topics that we will open. In the transport, you have many subjects. Again, I take just the last, demonstrating and testing innovative solutions for cleaner and better urban transport and mobility. I'm convinced that many of you are aware on that, but you just go on whatever ICT searching engine and you type MG5.5 minus 2015 and you will get all this activity. Generally, we speak about projects between 1 and 5 million euro in average, then it's quite consistent for European consortia to work on this issue. In the, obviously, environment and climate change resource efficiency program, you have, I will just point out the Waste 6, 2015, promoting eco-innovative waste management and prevention as part of sustainable urban development, which can be of your interest. In the inclusive topics, we have a very nice Eranet on smart urban futures, where many issues discussed over these 2 days could be continued, could be worked on. This with the member states' activity. And on the security, I will just mention the first one, the protection of urban soft targets and urban critical infrastructure. You see that this is another language that we did not cover so much over these 2 days, but which are of concern of many people in Europe and elsewhere. Let me conclude. 3 sentences: the egoism of urban sprawl, the praise of density, and maybe what I could call the nightmare of overdensity. That may be my perception, but I think that we have never spoken. We always praise the density, which I praise too, but I call really the nightmare of overdensity. And I think that that's also an important item. And finally, this is my dada, apologize for my Latin, from proprietas to usus. We have been based between, all our life has been based on ownership, on private ownership, at least since I'm born. I made the collection of, and you have the collection of small cars, and it's my small cars, and you have your child 3 years old, which say, this is my small car. When you are 15 years old, I remember people say, that's mon disc, my disc. You remember 33, vinyl, it seems middle age, but that's our generation. And then I think that the future, and I strongly believe in that, and we will work on that in the future of research and innovation, on taking care and taking benefits from the unifying power of internet and smartphones, the new economy and younger generation, and to have less ownership. We should not always purchase things. You know, when you are in certain place of the world, you want to buy 1 sweatshirt, and they told you, if you buy 2, you will get a third for free. That's a typical, I will not say I am a big friend of the American colleagues, but I think that the way how the society is built, you want 1 sweatshirt and you get 2 for 2, and you get a third. I'm not sure that that's really the future of our planet. And then more access. I like very much the renting, the sharing, and the swapping. Thank you very much for the invitation, and all the best.
Thank you very much. Domenico, you were almost too fast. I would have liked to hear more, but thank you. Thank you. That was an impressive closure. And I would like to take at least 2 questions now. If people are curious to know. Yes, there is a question there? Did you raise your hand? No. Yes? Over here, please. Thanks.
Not really a question, just a point of detail. You have mentioned about banana or nimbi, but since maybe 4 or 5 years, for example, in France, that we are talking about bee built in my backyard. So I think, heureusement, les choses continuent.
I should ask that to the key colleagues which want to make an airport close to Nantes, or I'm not sure that this concept has really taken over all around Europe. I think that if you are in an area where you have nothing, it's true, but what I notice in most of the relative large infrastructure, which could be electrical transmission line, which could be new wind farms, which could be new railway, or new or other new project of station, whatever, even for public interest, in most of Europe, we have this NIMBY and banana, and that's my impression. I don't have the data, the evidence, but when I see my colleagues which desperately work on the trans-European network, and when I see the time that they need because one mayor of a village of 200 people is waiting for the authorization, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that I'm also partly right.
Thank you. One question over there, please. Thank you. Professor Hussain?
I'm speaking as a convert to your message. I fully buy it, but what I'm worried about is the political conditions for its realization, especially if the initiatives come from the European Union. I live in England, and I'm very pessimistic when I see the rise of parties which are extremely suspicious and skeptic about the whole existence of the European Union.
I am very sad too. While I recognize that over time, I remember since Margaret Thatcher in the 80s, UK has not always been the engine of European integration.
Now that is an understatement. I have a question, but I don't know whether I should. Yes, well, there's a question there. Meanwhile, can I just ask Domenico, you had a slide, one of the slides, you did it so fast that I may have misinterpreted it, but diversity and inequality. You had distinguished between global inequality and European diversity, I think. And I just wanted to ask you, given the last 6 rather intense and difficult years that we've had, how much are we getting close to being global in this slide, as opposed to just European? And is this...
No, I think that we cannot compare the Sao Paulo situation.
No.
This is Sao Paulo picture, my Brazilian colleague, and this is, I never went there, but I found this picture quite relevant. If you are over cynic, which I'm not, you can say that the people living here have a beautiful landscape. Okay? But what has changed, I think, with the inequality, is that inequality we always had since the Romans, since the Greek, we had always inequalities. But now the inequalities are looking one on the other. And this is, I think, it's completely explosive. The proximity of a private swimming pool in a building in front of a favelas, I think that this is completely explosive. In Europe, I think that we are not at the level of the slum. When I see people in many countries, you know, the question of inequalities, in Switzerland, when they reduced the minimum salary to 2,000 euro, they found a revolution, and they found, you know, when they reduced the salary, the minimum salary to 2,000 euro, the equivalent of 2,000 euro, I do not think that we can compare this inequality in Europe with the inequality there. We have, obviously, certain regions of Europe we have suffered a lot, and my wife is Spanish. 50% of the young people in Spain are unemployed. They're unemployed, but fortunately enough, they have the legacy where they have a roof, they have electricity, they have food, they have water. I'm certainly not making the praise of this situation, and I hope really that the crisis is partly over, and the recent figures in Spain, for example, shows that the effort made these last couple of years in Spain start to be rewarding in terms of jobs creation, but it's certain that we have inequality which are rising in Europe, but which are certainly not at the same level than the picture here on the left.
Thank you for your presentation. I think in your slides and also the Horizon 2020 strategy, we see a lot of strategy about, talk about the different kinds of infrastructure, such as energy, transportation, green building, etc. But is there any agenda or practices about building a more integrated infrastructure system?
Could you repeat?
Is there any agenda or practices about building a more integrated infrastructure system, like building the link between this energy system, water system?
Can I ask to Olivia to translate in Italian, please? I do not get the question. Interpreted infrastructure?
Integrated. Like
integrated,
yes.
Interconnected. Thank you. Apologize. My English is very poor.
No
I apologize. Concretely, what we try to build at EU level with the so-called trans-European networks, we try really to integrate. The major missing links in Europe are the borders. You know, if you are French, everything brings you to Paris very easily. You can get there by almost by foot, by cycling, by horses, by highways, by high-speed train, or by airport, okay? By plane. When you have to make Bordeaux-San Sebastian between this region, that's really the missing links, and I think where we have to make progress and where we have to work more. To interconnect, you have the high-speed train, which generally stop at the border. And I think that that's for the future major challenges that we have, to connect more the infrastructure between the member states.
Anyway, yes, let me try. I won't inflict you another presentation. It's too late and nobody is ready for that. But just to remind you that before the conference we circulated to everybody, keynote speakers, etc., a request of volunteering, providing a list of 3 priority areas or 3 priority research questions which you believe to be of a priority nature. And many of you have answered. This was meant, and in fact has to some extent served as a kind of anticipation of your expectations with regard to the conference contents. And well, of course, I can only hope that these expectations have been at least partly met. What I'd like to do now is going very briefly, browsing through a quick summary of the answers that we got from you in reply to these questions. Not so much to discussing them here, of course, but just for you to know, first of all, that they exist and that we would like to get some additional feedback from you, because this is going to help us to, again, consolidate our conclusions in terms of what are the most pressing issues that could be, for instance, also in a dialogue with the European Commission or with other funding agencies, be considered as the issues that deserve attention and possibly research financing. And maybe, why not? Also, this could be the beginning of the preparation of the agenda for the next conference. Who knows? So, very briefly, we tried to group the answers that we got in 5 main areas: governance and institutional reforms, urban and territorial development and planning, the social and human factors, resources, technology, and environmental issues, and, of course, future studies, which is kind of an overarching theme for our conference. Within each of those, we have a number of issues, which, again, I will not list and comment in detail, but which I'm sure you will find familiar in terms of having heard of these things, most of these things during the conference, which I hope, again, helps to somehow at least partly fulfill your expectations. Clearly, there are issues which are more global, like political innovation, urban governance, disambiguation of new concepts, others which are more related to specific issues associated to regional matters or even to local matters. The ones in red here are typically associated to problems that have been raised by or for Chinese considerations. And the same goes with the urban and territorial development and planning, general issues such as the resilience of urban systems, more specific aspects. Some of these, for instance, this I must say that, for instance, this is an issue which I haven't heard discussed. I haven't been able to join all the sessions, but post-disaster urban, it seemed to be an interesting concept to look at in terms of future research. And then, of course, the relation between the different tiers of territory and government and the cross-influences. We've heard lately this afternoon about the need to defragment knowledge and go for a more holistic approach to the city development and welfare, successful public spaces, specific issues associated to the dynamics of land, the desertification of rural areas, and also the contrast and how to reconcile, if at all, the tendency of city growth in certain areas of the world with the shrinking cities in areas like the EU. So these are, again, themes which we have collected from you and which we believe could be further explored. The social and human factor, again, we've heard, if only this afternoon, about a number of very important issues: the quality of urban welfare, and more importantly, maybe even our ability to measure such concept in a new framework and with new approaches, the human flourishing, the need for social and spatial justice. Again, this could also be associated to a tendency, a dangerous tendency towards the loss of certain civil liberties associated to some exogenous driving factor. Planning and developing specific infrastructure for the social cohesion and sustainability of cities, and of course the role of technology, in particular of internet, to run democracy. Who knows? Integration of cultural diversity. This was very recent by Domenico, who reminded it to us, so I'm glad it's here. And of course, a very Chinese issue associated to the integration involvement of large migration populations. We're almost there, don't worry. Resources, technology, and environment, the scarcity issue, which again is kind of overarching and dominating the whole picture. But this, I think, was very interesting to listen from John Fernandez on the keynote yesterday morning about the specific urban dimension of the resource scarcity and the requirements associated to understanding of specific issues, material flow analysis, and so on, certainly deserving additional attention. The impacts of global changes, and particularly of those who represent major hazards like climate change and other disasters. An interesting innovation about the concept of regional, indigenous, or endogenous, I don't know what's the best word, innovation concept, which to me, I took the liberty of somehow associating it to another suggestion which pointed at the possible role of cities as innovation hubs. I think there's a territorial dimension of the innovation engine to be explored here, which probably deserves additional attention. And finally, of course, future studies. We've heard many very inspiring and challenging presentations. This is a very poor attempt to summarize them only based on the suggestion that came from you. So clearly the urban transition towards sustainability as a cross-cutting theme of all the conference. More courageously, I would say, getting rid of outworn assumptions and outworn or updated or not effective anymore development models. The attempt is trying to really achieve some level of globality without falling into the main pitfalls and traps of globalization, which means, among other things, being able to preserve the innate character of cities, which is not a minor challenge. And of course, from a methodological point of view of future studies, I'm sure that many of you have been exposed to things that they probably, at least part of this community who is not traditionally related to future studies, I hope you have perceived the richness of the research community and framework in this area, but clearly there's much more to be done in terms particularly of inviting participation and participatory creative mechanism to get there. One last issue with a couple of question marks, because clearly it's not only difficult, I would say impossible to say whether it's either plausible or desirable. When we look at the future of cities, we have been, of course, making a certain number of differentiations between areas of the world, but does this mean that there is an emerging consensus that there will be or there will not be a convergence in terms of paradigm, model, vision, and sustainability interpretation in the various regions of the world? That's a tall order, and I'm sure that I can leave you with that, thanking you again for your questions so far, but even more for getting back to us. We will put this short non-presentation on the website so that you can and you should hopefully also enrich it, get back to us. Like I said, this hopefully will serve the purpose also to pave the way towards the agenda of the next conference. Can I say that? Okay, thank you very much.